Alright guys, today we are going to take some notes on the first section from chapter 7, which is about exponents. So, first things first, we're going to go to our table of contents. And we're going to put page 57 and 58, exponent rules. It just kind of has a double meaning because we're going to be learning exponent rules, like rules that we have to follow in regards to exponents, but they also rule, so that's cool. Okay, we don't really, I guess we could have a word worth knowing. We could know exponents, it's a good word to know. Okay, so in our words worth knowing, let's put exponent. An exponent is a number that tells us how many times to multiply a base number. So an exponent is a number that tells us how many times to multiply a base number, which hopefully we kind of understand what an exponent is, and we're going to look at that a little more closely in our notes. So let's go to page 57 and 58. 57 we're going to leave for practice problems in class, activities in class or whatever. Page 58 is where we're going to put our notes. You should have got your notes today that looks like this, although yours is probably a little bigger. You might want to cut it down to size, and then we're going to fold in half right along this middle line here. So I'm just going to try to line this up. And then we can cut along all these little edges to make little doors. Now if you want, today we're just doing exponents, zero rule and negative rule, so you could just do those for now if you want, or you could just do the whole thing. Either way. And then we're going to put it on this page here, but I'm going to kind of leave that detached for now because it'll be easier for me to write the notes and then tape it in later, glue it in later. Okay, so exponents. First thing we got to talk about is exactly what is an exponent, although we just kind of defined it and hopefully you've seen it before. But an exponent looks something like this. We have a number and then a little baby number right there. This whole thing, the entire number, is known as a power. This little number right here, that is the exponent. And then this number right here, the big number, is known as the base number. And it's really important for our purposes to think of every number and every letter as having an exponent. If you don't see it, then it's just one. So every number or letter has an exponent. It's one if you don't see it. Okay, so for example, we might have like this 8 to the third thing. That means we're going to do 8 times 8 times 8, which is really big. So 8 times 8 times 8 is 512. Which is a really big answer, and so sometimes we won't actually evaluate these exponents. We might just leave it as like a number like that. So if we had something like a to the fifth, that would just mean a times a times a times a times a, which we can't do, so really that's just a to the fifth. So we're going to be looking at numbers with powers and letters with powers. Alright, so next we got the zero rule. So let's look at the zero rule. So the zero rule says that if I have any letter or number to the 0 power, then my answer is always 1. So anything to the 0 power is equal to 1, which may seem kind of silly, but I'm going to explain why that is in a second and show you why that happens, because it's actually pretty cool and makes total sense. I guess it's always 1, or if there's a negative, then maybe -1. So if we had something like -8 to the 0 power, that would be -1. So that's maybe something to keep in mind. Okay, and then the last one we're going to do today is the negative rule. So the negative rule says that negative exponents are not allowed. And so you may be thinking, that's great, Missouri, I don't ever have to worry about negatives anymore. Well, that's not totally true, because there are still negative exponents, there are still negative numbers, and so they may appear and you need to know how to get rid of them since they are not allowed. So the way to get rid of them is to move them to make them positive. Which, that might sound weird too, like move a number, where do I move it to? Well, that's why fractions are so important. If you consider every number as a fraction, then every number has a top and a bottom. Okay, so if my number is in the top and has a negative exponent, let's say for instance 5 to the -3rd, okay, that's not allowed, and so I have to move this 5, which is currently in the top, to the bottom. So I'd put 5 to the 3rd in the bottom, and I can make it positive because I moved it. Well, what's on top then? What was this 5 to the 3rd being multiplied by? Well, nothing really, but if I don't see it, then it's 1. The opposite is also true. So if I had something like 1 over x to the -5th, negatives aren't allowed. This number here that has the negative power is in the bottom, and so I have to move it to the top. And when I move it to the top, 1 times anything is just that thing, and since I moved it, I can make it positive. There's nothing left in the denominator anymore except for a 1, and I don't really need to write that. So you want to think of every number as having a top and a bottom. And so that's it, but I want to explain to you why these two things happen, because it's kind of strange, but I think if you look at it, it makes sense. So let's consider 2 to the 4th power. And just because 2 is easy and 2 to the 4th I can do pretty easily. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 16. Okay? Then if I go down 1, so I'm like subtracting my exponents, 2 to the 3rd would be 2 times 2 times 2. That's 8. Then when I do 2 to the 2nd, that's 2 times 2, which is 4. 2 to the 1st means that I'm just doing 1, 2, which is just 2. And so now I get to 2 to the 0 power, and maybe we're not quite sure, except we know the rule now, but why does that happen? So if we take a look at the answers that we're getting here, 16, then 8, then 4, then 2, there's kind of a pattern going on there. Each time we are going down by half. So we're taking half of 16, that's 8. Half of 8, that's 4. Half of 4, that's 2. And so I have to continue that pattern. Half of 2 is 1. So that's kind of why that happens. And if you look over here, it's like I have 4 2's, then 3 2's. So it is like I divided 2 away. I took one of those multiplications off. And when I undo multiplication, I'm doing division. So now when I go down again to -1, now I'm in the negatives. Negatives aren't allowed, and so we move them to make them negative. Or if I follow this pattern, I have to divide this by 2. And so if I divide 1 by 2, that's really just half. And if I think about moving this, I would have to move the 2 to the 1st to the denominator, and 2 to the first is just 1 over 2. So, if we do it one more time, 2 to the negative second, I'd have to divide half by 2 again. Half of half is a fourth. And if you think about it in terms of negative exponents not being allowed, I'd have to move that 2 to the second to the bottom, and 2 to the second is 4. So it totally works out. It's so cool. And it doesn't just work with 2. The same thing would happen with 3, which we can talk about more in class tomorrow. So make sure you get those notes, and you're good to go. And we'll see you in class tomorrow.